I think in Dubai, because we don't really have a Bollywood or a Hollywood here or like a Lollywood, they've kind of become the local celebrities. The celebrities that we've
Yeah.
got in Dubai are the influencers.
Mm.
Sometimes it does go too far with certain people, without calling out names, like certain people, they just talk about the brands they work with, or they just talk about their campaigns. And I think that gets a little tedious at times.
Mm.
And then there's also influencers that I've worked with who it just becomes so obvious that they're only in it for the free goods. They just want the
Oh.
freebies. They just want that free hotel stay. They just want those free clothes. They have no passion for what they do, and it shows.
Hi, welcome back to Popcorn. This is Habib. I've noticed there's a lot of new listeners lately to the podcast, and this is great. Our Instagram is growing, our listener count is growing as well, and we've been getting a lot of really good feedback from people, so I really appreciate that. I'm glad you're enjoying the podcast, and I hope you continue listening. We have a lot of great episodes planned. And a reminder for all of our listeners, you can subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to us, whichever app you use. And of course, if you're on your PC, you can actually listen to us on the website as well, popcorn.com. And we're also on SoundCloud. We're on pretty much every podcasting app. So today's episode is with Haroon Tahir. Haroon is a blogger and an influencer based in the U.A.E. Very nice, very kind, very great personality. On his Instagram, he discusses fashion, poetry, and snippets from his blog. You can follow Haroon using his username on Instagram, Haroon Tahir. There's no spaces in the middle. We'll also link to that on the episode description. In this episode, Haroon will talk about his journey to becoming an influencer. And Haroon also got a bunch of questions from his followers that they wanted to have answered on this podcast. So we'll be addressing some of those, including how do you deal with online hate? And what advice do you have for people who are trying to become influencers as well? So this is a pretty good, productive discussion. Here's Haroon.
Yeah, I'm 24. I live in Dubai. I've been here pretty much my whole life. I work in marketing and PR. I work for a marketing agency. And my side hustle is I have a blog. I have a page on Instagram, and that's sort of my outlet where I share fashion posts. I mean, the way I sum up my page is it's fashion, it's poetry, and it's perspective. I've been doing it for a good 3 to 4 years. So I went to journalism school. I've got a blog ever since I was in college. And then, when Instagram sort of started taking off, I was very blessed to have friends who took pictures of me. And, I've always really been into fashion. So I'm very grateful. I've gotten to work with some really cool brands that I love and adore. Just today, I shot for Levi's. I've loved Levi's growing up. So I've
Okay.
worked with brands like Levi's, like Timberland, like Lacoste. So yeah, it's been a really cool journey. And I managed to work as well at the same time.
Yeah. What do you do full time? What's your main job? You said you went to journalism school, and
Yeah, I majored in economics and I minored in journalism. And that led me to working in market research. And
mm,
now I work for a marketing and PR agency. So I handle the marketing and PR activities and I do a bit of social media as well for clients like Hyatt Hotels, Rixos
see.
Hotels, Suit Supply, Tag Heuer. So it's a nice mix of like fashion brands,
Okay.
hospitality brands, and F&B brands
Got it.
as well. And yeah, it's agency life. I'm sure people who
I
work
see.
in an agency know it can get very hectic and crazy, and it's long hours, but it's a lot of fun. You learn something new every day.
Yeah. So just to be clear, these companies that you're working with, these brands,
Mm,
Levi's and the
mm,
other ones, these are all
mm.
through your company, or is it?
No, through my blog, through my Instagram page. I mean, that's something completely separate. I mean, sometimes it gets a little difficult to draw the line because I
Right.
do the PR for a male fashion brand as well, which is interesting. But no, like the projects that I do get, it comes through my blog, through my Instagram page. So,
Got it.
my username's Haroon Tahir, and yeah, it comes through there.
That makes sense. All right. When did you start
Yeah.
doing that? When did you get that first gig?
First gig. It's been kind of 3.5 years ago I started. So I always had a blog. And then when Instagram was taking off, one of my friends who's also, I always use speech marks when I say influencer, so
Right.
imagine me using air quotes right now, influencer. Um, she's like, oh, and I've always been into fashion. Like, I'd always love to be suited up at college. I'd always like, get my pants tailored. I'd always wear prints. I was always into fashion growing up.
Uh-huh.
So one of my really close friends was an influencer, Saima. Shout out to her. She's like, why don't you start posting on your Instagram? Why don't you start doing like these outfit of the day posts? And I was like, yeah, sure. If you take my pictures. So she did.
Hmm.
And, I just kind of started from there. I just share my fashion posts. At the same time, poetry is also one of my passions. So I did have a poetry page. And after I got published, that gave me a lot of confidence. I got published in this journal in the UK. Shout out to my professor who made that happen.
Hmm.
Um, After that happened, I thought, like all the male poets I used to follow, they would never show their face. There'd always be recluses, and there's just a lot of negative stereotypes I feel associated with guys who write. I don't know how you
Really?
feel about that.
Huh.
Yeah, like there's a lot of negative stereotypes, like they're always depressed, or
Ah,
they're antisocial, or they're reclusive, and I
yeah.
just kind of wanted to show that, okay, the modern man can dress up and wear a suit and, have a full time job and do his thing and still write and still be,
Still right.
vulnerable, emotional, and deep. Again, my air quotes are
Mhm.
out, deep and, relatable. So I just try to do that through my page. I call it a bit of fashion, a bit of poetry, and a bit of perspective.
What type of poetry do you write? Is it English or Urdu or
I've written a bit of Urdu, but my Urdu isn't great. I'll be honest. But it's
same
it's
here?
English. Yeah, my Urdu isn't that great. Yeah,
Yeah.
mostly English. I mean, the stuff that's been published is also English. I try
Mhm.
not to write content in Urdu or do posts in Urdu because I feel like I'm very grateful that I've got, I live in Dubai, so I've got followers from all different sorts of nationalities, and I want to keep everyone engaged and involved. But Urdu
Yeah.
is a beautiful language. Honestly, I'd love to. I've got Urdu poets in my own family. So my uncle's a poet, and he writes some beautiful poetry in Urdu. But
Yeah.
half of the stuff he says when he's reciting it, it goes way above my head. So
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. Yeah, I love
yeah,
Urdu poetry. It's very deep. The language, it just seems very optimal for poetry. Yeah, I know. I just love the Urdu content, but just like you, like it
yeah,
just flies right over my head. It just
yeah.
a lot of the lines. Then I have to really study them and understand what's going on. I like learning that, but kind of like you, I try not to speak Urdu way too often. Um, Having this Pakistani podcast, obviously, I have to
Yeah.
sometimes. So,
It's
but
good.
I'm not too
No,
afraid of messing up. Yeah,
I do. I speak Urdu at home. I speak my Pakistani friends. I speak Urdu with them.
yeah,
In fact, yeah. But I love the language. But yeah, I just don't publicly post about it.
yeah. And I might be speaking out of bias, but your poetry, I've never
Yeah.
had like a negative perception of poetry, but I might be
Mm.
biased because I love poetry myself. I don't write poetry,
Oh, that's
but
amazing.
I've never really had a negative stereotype of men who write or whatnot. But
I've gotten
no,
a lot over the years, and I still do. And I think most of the online hate that I get is weirdly relating to that. It's not what I
really,
wear. It's not, yeah, it's like people think that you're an easy target because you're, at least the stuff I post is sometimes very vulnerable and it's sometimes very open, and it just people just think you're an easy target. Yeah, and I've heard stereotypes all the time, and I get told things like, "Oh, I didn't know you could write," like because
uh,
I dress a certain way or because I modeled a little bit or worked for certain brands, I can't be
yeah.
intelligent.
Exactly. Yeah, people have this weird perception that you can only have one or the other, right? You can either
You
be a
can, yeah, you
popular
can
extrovert, or you can, sit in a den and be creative. You can't be both. It's kind of a strange
exactly, and
perception.
yeah, that's what I try to in my own little small little way to change and show
Yeah,
that also show that men can be vulnerable and also show their face because I don't know all the poets that I follow and I look up to. I don't know anything about their personal life. I don't even know how
yeah,
they look like,
mm,
and that's sometimes that kind of bothers me, like in maybe in some ways they are ashamed, if I may
Mm.
say, of saying how showing how they look or sharing their personal life. But yeah, it's just my own
Yeah.
little way of changing things and being like, no. Meanwhile, the woman, like, whether it's, I'm just gonna mention the big names, Effie, Marie, or Ruby Kaur, they're always, out there and they're
Right.
showing their face. But the men are more reclusive for some reason.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. No, you would know a lot more about that. The perception that I would have around this is maybe
Hmm.
in that line of work when you want
Hmm.
people to focus more on your writing, not so much your
Yeah,
face. Maybe that's just
yeah,
that's just a reason. If their profession was a little different that requires showing your face more, like
yeah,
modeling, something else, acting, singing, then that
yeah.
would make sense. Poetry isn't something you have to be
Something
successful
you
in.
need to show your
Um,
face for. But then the
yeah.
women show it. What always throws me off is the women do show their face, but it's the men
Yeah.
don't.
That's
But
interesting.
yeah, that's
Very
just
interesting.
that's just probably me. Yeah, but I agree. I always find it difficult to kind of strike it. I mean, I got a few questions on my Instagram about it, but I always find it difficult to strike a balance as well, right? Because a lot of times I'm working with a brand and I have to write a certain thing or my next post will be like a really deep poem. So sometimes I find it difficult to find a balance as well, but I try to
Mm.
tread the fine line and kind of do both.
Yeah. Well, Haroon, you mentioned this online hate. Talk
Mm.
about that a little bit. Why would you get hate, and what type of hate is that?
I think I mean, all my friends who do this, whether they're like vloggers or bloggers or just people on Instagram, I think, there is now this culture, like, when people see you have more than a couple thousand followers or, you're doing certain things, they think you're
Yeah.
an easy target. And, they just reach out to you. Like, sometimes I get ridiculous things like, oh, F you, I hate you, I hate your life,
What?
you know? Yeah.
Wait, they DM you,
Um,
or they leave those comments on your public feed?
they DM me. At least in my case, it's never ever a comment. I think it is
Huh.
harder for women. I think women get a lot of degrading and derogatory comments. Like a lot of my female friends who are bloggers or bloggers, they get. But I've thankfully never gotten comments. But I do get just ridiculous, out of the blue stuff. Like from like a 15-year-old kid,
Yeah.
and
For what? What's the cause behind that? What are they looking at that makes them dislike you so much?
sometimes it's a certain thing I've posted.
Huh?
Like I did a post on there was this online campaign going on. A friend of mine, Arfa, she started this campaign called Unapologetically Me. So I kind of gave my own 2 cents on it and how as a man I'm not afraid to
Mm.
be vulnerable or be open about who I am.
Right.
And someone just was like, oh, you're so entitled, f you, and
Oh my
you know
god.
you can't walk that walk and you can't talk that, and just wrote
Mm.
this really long message. And I was like,
Mm.
I just block. I think early on when I did start off, I would engage with people like that,
Mm.
and it would only make things worse. It's like fighting fire with fire. It never leads anywhere.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it's just young people, honestly, like people below 18.
Mm.
I've noticed a pattern. They're always like, they don't have an outlet to vent, and
Yeah.
they probably lead difficult lives themselves. And I think
Mm.
social media does give you this sense of what we call FOMO a lot of times.
Yeah. Fear of missing out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's what I tell a lot of kids, who ask me or who tell me stuff like, "Oh, your life looks so great," or "Oh, how did you become this?" Or they don't see the hard work that goes in, or sometimes you might be at like the fanciest event, working with the nicest brand, but on the inside of things, behind the scenes, you might be having the worst day. You might have a
Mm.
fight with your best friend, or work might be a nightmare.
Right.
So I always remind people, I'm very grateful. I try to speak to people who message me and say these things. I always try to remind them that, it's always a filtered version. Anyone's social media, not just mine, it's always a filtered version of their lives.
Very
I mean,
true.
I do try to keep it as real as possible, but no
Mm.
one, no one out there is going to post about their failure, because
Yeah.
social media is about focusing on the positives, and that's what it should be
Of course.
about.
And plus, I mean, can you really imagine like you're kind of stressed out and
Mm,
frustrated and you're taking a selfie holding your head or
mm.
something? It just doesn't make sense. And putting that on Instagram, uh, these social media outlets are made for showing the part of your life that
That's positive.
shows
Yeah.
positivity. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I have to say though, like the most successful like influencers or vloggers that I do know or I've worked with are people who always focus on the positives. Like, I know girls and guys who
Mm,
have hundreds and thousands of followers, and they lead very difficult lives. Either they're divorced or they're single moms or they've got terrible personal lives, but they never ever let a speckle of it show on their social media, and they're always positive. They
yeah,
always look at the positive side, and I feel like I'm someone who really believes in the law of attraction. I feel like it works for them.
so true.
Yeah,
No, it's
yeah,
incredible. It's amazing when you have problems of your own.
yeah,
Like, you probably have that as well, but you
yeah. I
still
think all of us do. Yeah,
always have a smile on your face, right? Yeah, but there's this weird perception that people, influencers or anybody famous
yeah,
who has an untraditional line of work, and a lot of that involves dealing with people or having a strong
mm,
social life, that
mm,
these people are automatically happy. But that's evidently
mm.
not true. Some of the
Yeah.
greatest rates of depression are in Hollywood among celebrities
Mm.
who we think
They
were
they are.
role
Yeah,
models for us. Yeah,
yeah,
they probably
exactly.
neglect their feelings sometimes.
And yeah, that's why when I do get asked questions like that, like people
Mhm.
just, especially younger people, they want to be influencers or vloggers or whatever so bad. And I always tell them, it's just a filtered, there's so much more to life than social media or than what you see on social media.
Right. Well, regarding these, you mentioned it's a pattern of young people kind of reaching out to you
Mm,
to vent.
mm,
That I can relate a lot to that as well. That makes complete sense to me. I was actually talking to my sister about this.
hmm
How everywhere I go on the internet nowadays, especially over the last 2 years, I check my Twitter, I check my Instagram, Facebook,
mm,
just like browsing
mm,
comments and news
mm.
articles and whatnot, and people are outraged everywhere. Like, just
Yeah,
outrage over stuff that wasn't even a big deal 5 years ago,
relevant.
10 years ago.
Yeah,
Like, people just want to be angry, and I wanted to get your buy-in on what is causing that. These are some of the negative aspects of social
yeah, social media,
networks that I
definitely.
find. Yeah, it
Yeah,
just connects all
I
these
think
people's lives, and they just want to vent. But what's the solution for this? What's the driver?
the driver, I think it's just that everyone suddenly has a voice, and it might be someone who's, very young in high school and is going through a lot in their personal lives. I mean, I'm so grateful that when I was 14 or 15, I didn't have a public Twitter account. I would have
Yeah,
said the most insane things as well.
yeah.
So I think it's just that, it's given everyone.
Wait, that's a great point. Now you see this happening where
Yeah,
people's old tweets are being resurfaced and
used against them. Yeah,
coming back to haunt them, right? Yeah, used
yeah,
against them from like 10, 20 years ago, when those people might have been completely different persons back then.
yeah,
So completely true.
yeah.
Whatever you put out there is permanent.
I mean, I always say, because I work in PR as well. It's so important to think before you type, or I mean, you should think before you speak anyway. But like,
Yeah,
especially think twice before you type something out, and think about how you'd feel if someone said that to you. And I think now everyone's got a voice, so it's just, and everyone's a journalist in this era, sort of, on Twitter, on Instagram,
very
and
true.
it's just given people a lot of power. So I'd always tell people to use that power for good, and always think about what you're about to say. Yeah, it's fine to make a joke, it's fine to, I do think people get very sensitive about things as well. I'm trying to think of, there's so many examples in the past. Like I heard of this cut for Bieber thing that happened where girls like, slashed their wrists for Justin Bieber because he
What?
did something.
Really?
Yeah, like there's so much on the internet.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
just think about, before you analyze someone's tweet or before you go to attack them, just think about, put yourself in their shoes and just be more aware of what you say.
Wow. I give you a lot of credit, Haroon. Like people like you, and you mentioned this specifically the female influencers as well. They go through a lot.
Yeah, it is harder for females. Yeah.
Despite all that hate, negativity, yeah, despite all that, you still keep your head up and you don't really let that reflect out there.
Yeah.
It's,
Thank you.
it's
I
interesting
mean,
to see that hate, that overview of what type of hate you get online. It's
yeah.
incredible.
There are some, I gotta say, some very kind people as well. And, I find kind, like from the most random countries in the world, like I
Mhm.
would never imagine, like, people from Hungary or Sweden following me or speaking to me every day.
Yeah,
But there are a lot of kind people as well. So
Of course,
I
yeah,
do gotta say that, there are a lot of kind people, and
and that helps offset that.
I guess
Yeah,
it does, yeah.
yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Even one fan counts. Even one person who likes your work.
Yeah.
That's motivation to continue.
I don't think of them as fans, but yeah.
Fans, followers, yeah,
Yeah.
however you want to put it. People
Yeah.
who admirers, people who like your content.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah.
One of the questions submitted by I think one of your followers was,
Hmm.
"What do you think of influencer culture?" I'm just reading this question off the list.
I think it's evolved a lot. I think as someone who works with influencers, and then I work on campaigns myself as well. I think it's a great time as a brand. You get to generate ROI by working with someone who is just a content creator. It's not a publication. It's not a billboard. It's just a person. I think influencers can add a lot of personal value to their brand, or personal story. Like, I can give you my example. Recently, I worked with an oud brand, a perfume brand,
Mhm.
and this the scent reminded me of my dad's perfume. The perfumes that he used to wear while growing up. And I spoke about that, and I added my own sort of personal twist to it, and the brand really appreciated it. So I think what's really interesting with influencers is they add a personal twist to whatever campaign they're doing. They bring their own story, their own ideas to the table. But if you're going on a billboard, let's say, if you're a brand, if you're going out into PR as a press release, there won't be any personal touch to your brand, right?
Mhm.
You'll say what you want to say. So I think that's something that's really interesting about influencer culture. I think in Dubai, because we don't really have a Bollywood or a Hollywood here, or like a Lollywood, they've kind of become the local celebrities. The celebrities that we've
Yeah.
got in Dubai are the influencers.
Mhm.
Sometimes it does go too far with certain people, without calling out names. Like certain people, they just talk about the brands they work with, or they just talk about their campaigns, and I think that gets a little tedious at times.
Mhm.
And then there's also influencers that I've worked with who are, it just becomes so obvious that they're only in it for the free goods. They just want the
Oh.
freebies. They just want that free hotel stay. They just want those free clothes. They have no passion for what they do, and it shows.
Mhm.
And
How did they get that far? I don't get it. How would they get that far?
I mean, a lot of people out there, they buy
Mhm.
followers. They do all sorts of things to get famous, to get hype on Instagram.
I see.
But I think people have become intelligent now, and they're starting to see, like, if someone, like, let's say a girl, if she's posting about 6 makeup brands in a day,
Mhm.
or 6 different designers doing the same thing in a day, people are starting to see that it's
Mhm.
inauthentic. On the other hand, I
Yeah.
do see, because I work with, for my clients, I do see the ROI they bring. They do bring, if you work with a certain influencer, like a certain group of influencers, suddenly your social media page jumps. Like, I've worked on projects for clients where I've seen, like, their impressions triple, or quadruple the minute they work with a certain group of influencers, or their sales increase. So I do see a benefit to it, and
Interesting.
especially in a time when people have stopped reading. People are
Yeah.
spending more and more time on social media. I
Right.
think it can be used for good, but then, yeah, they're
Mhm.
like any profession. There's
Yeah.
there's the bad bits as well, and there are people who are giving influencers
Mhm.
a bad name as well. But then there are people who are making an actual impact, or using it for good, or just being authentic to themselves, and telling their
Mhm.
story in the best way, and working with great brands. I think
Mhm.
one great thing in terms of fashion that the influencer culture has done is it's opened a lot of doors, and it's like made it into a democracy. Like, 10 years ago, you would never imagine a random person sitting front row at a fashion show, like at a fashion
Yeah.
show in Dubai. You would editors, or
Right.
the VVIPs, or people of that a certain status to be sitting front row. But now you have, people who are just very passionate about fashion, and who
Yeah.
have a story to tell. They might have a few thousand followers, and they
Right.
manage to sit front row, and they manage to work with these incredible brands. So I think it's broken down. Social media in general
Yeah.
has helped us break down a lot of barriers as well.
Oh yeah. Of course. Yeah.
Um,
Makes
and in
sense.
a lot of industries that were very, like fashion, that were very sort of I don't want to say snotty, but like snobby,
Mm,
but they were difficult to get into for an average person.
mm,
So yeah, there's
yeah,
good to it and bad to it as well. Yeah, I think I've seen it all. Someone who works with in it and works with them as well, especially in
yeah,
Dubai, where unfortunately everyone wants to be an influencer and everyone wants to be seen and everyone wants to be heard.
right.
um, I have my fair share of stories, but
Mm,
yeah, there have been some
interesting.
great experiences as well. Yeah,
Wow. Speaking from a consumer's perspective, right? I've always
yeah.
wondered this. Actually, this is a good time to ask this question.
Mm.
So,
Tell me.
you mentioned inauthenticity sometimes happens
Mm.
when you can clearly tell a person is not interested in the product or the brand that they're promoting.
Mm. I mean, I can tell as PR. Yeah, I can
Yeah.
tell as PR that they're not interested because when they
Yeah.
reach out to me, the way they reach out to me, or the way they, like sometimes I have, let's say, a food blogger saying that she wants a table for 10,
Mm,
and she wants free drinks for like 5 hours,
wow.
or she wants a brunch buffet for like 10 of her friends. And when you hear things like that,
Yeah.
you're just in it for, the free stuff.
Yeah. Right.
But
The
yeah,
perks, basically the
the
perks of
perks.
being an influencer. Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
you're speaking from a behind the stage perspective, which is
yeah,
amazing to hear. I'm talking about this as somebody in the audience,
consumer.
basically. So
Yeah.
I see this, yeah, as a consumer. I never really understood. Okay, forget about influencers. I'm also talking about celebrities.
Hmm.
I'm never, when I go out to buy lotion, I'm never inclined to buy Vino because Jennifer Aniston promoted it, right? Or like, oh, Shahid Afridi promoted Head and Shoulders. Okay, I'm gonna go buy Head and Shoulders. So not to like, not to criticize
Bashing.
those.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's just like I've never been the type of consumer that follows things. I do more. I think I'm more of a type of consumer. I do research around, what's the
Mm,
right product for my skin, or
mm,
what type of vitamins it has and whatnot. I do a
mm,
little bit of research, then I go out and buy
mm,
something. I've never really understood why or how this concept works. And like you said, it does
mm.
help. Like you see the lift in sales. So
Yeah.
how does it work? I just don't understand it.
I mean, I think everyone's on different. So, I mean, I studied marketing when I was in. I took a few marketing courses, and everyone in that we learned that everyone has different levels of susceptibility, right?
Mm,
And I think you're the type of consumer. The way you described yourself, you have a very low level of susceptibility, maybe like level
mm,
5, or like you know, you're more into research and making informed decisions. There are a lot of consumers out there who are more kind of encouraged by the aesthetic aspect of a product or the emotional value that it brings.
mm,
I'm not ashamed to admit I'm very influenced by Instagram. I still am, even when I was starting off. Fashion choices, let's say, a lot of my fashion choices would come from Pinterest. Even now when I go to
mm,
get a suit done or whatever, I look through
yeah.
print. I look through Pinterest, and that's where I kind of decide. Oh, I'll get my suit stitched in this
Mm,
color, or in this style, or in this fit.
yeah.
So I think it
Yeah.
just depends on what level of susceptibility you're on. And I think
Mm,
a lot of the products that influencers work with generally are products that are very, aesthetically pleasing,
yeah.
or they have an emotional value to them. Let's say oud fragrances. I get very emotional about perfumes.
Mm,
Perfumes mean a lot to me. So when I
okay.
see a nice perfume ad, I
Mm,
always go and buy it. So, I think all of us are in different levels of susceptibility.
yeah.
Um, with a lot of influencers, and even when I do collaborate with brands, I do speak about the benefits and the pros and cons of each product. So, in fact, when I review something for my blog, I actually have a pros and cons section. So when I'm reviewing something, I talk about what it is, how my experiences of using it, and I always talk about the pros, the cons, and the verdict. So
Mm,
I do try to, from my end, I do try to present a fairly objective and balanced view.
yeah. Do the brands appreciate that? Do they are they okay with the highlighting the negatives as well?
Um, they're not usually. I mean, thankfully, I've never worked with something that only has negatives.
Mm,
But yeah, brands do appreciate it. I mean, I worked with a watch brand and I reviewed the watch, and I mentioned some cons, and the PR actually emailed me and she actually thanked me and said, no one ever done that. They've never really talked about the cons of the. So some brands do appreciate it, some don't. There have been cases where I've been told not to say anything negative about a product, but I still do it. And as PR, I understand where they're coming from as well, but
Mm,
I know that I owe it to the people reading it to give them a
yeah.
balanced perspective. And now with their, especially in the UAE, there are a lot of laws in place for influencers. So if you're getting
Mm,
something for free, or if you're getting paid to do something, you always have to use the hashtag. You always have to write a hashtag ad on it, and you have to tell people that it's sponsored.
mm.
So I think these
Oh
little
yeah.
things also make a difference as well.
Right.
I know in Pakistan we don't. I mean, in Pakistan, influencer culture, from what I hear from my friends, is booming and on the up as well. But I know in Pakistan we don't have anything like that. But over in Dubai, it's very monitored as well now, I must say. I mean, the government's done a great job in monitoring it, and the influencers have respected as well now. And when they do something sponsored, it's important to tell people that it's
Yeah.
sponsored or you got it for free.
And for what it's worth, when I see a review that's actually pretty balanced, like you said, and it's
Mm-hmm.
fair,
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually much more inclined to
To
follow
buy it.
that rather than believe. Yeah,
Yeah.
when it's completely positive and you can completely tell like this person is being paid for this product. From my perspective, from my type of, I guess, the
Mm.
category of consumers that I fall into, it reduces the effectiveness of that. But that's
Yeah.
just it's just me. It makes sense. Let's see. The next question here is, oh, this is a good one. I'm like you said, a lot of other people want to grow their
Mm.
social presence, and
Mm.
also influencer culture. It's
Yeah.
booming. It's a relatively new thing, I think,
It
just to get
is.
famous off of social networks. So this is great. It's in Dubai. It's booming in Pakistan. It's growing for sure. I've seen that
Mm.
too.
Mm.
Every other person I land onto in Instagram has thousands and thousands of followers.
Your
It's
followers,
amazing.
yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of people are trying to get in. So, what advice
Yeah.
do you have for those types of people?
Just be consistent, and just get started. The thing that I really believe in, first movers advantage. I studied economics, so there's a concept called first movers advantage, where the person who moves first always has an advantage. So just get started with your content. Just take the plunge. I know so many talented friends who just, they might be the best dressed people in the world, but they don't post about it. So just start posting.
Yeah.
There's a ton load of apps to, if I can speak for Instagram and Facebook, because that's where sort of my sort of presence has been the past 3 years. There's a lot of apps that you can use. I swear by Lightroom. I always edit my photos on Lightroom.
Mm,
Try to be as authentic as you can to yourself. Don't listen to what, like when I was starting off, a lot of my friends in PR were like, oh, don't post poetry, that's going to throw people off. You're not going to get any
yeah.
campaigns if people see you post poetry.
Mm,
And I didn't listen to them. So just be authentic to yourself. Post every day. When I was starting off, I used to post every day.
mm,
And don't be afraid of using promotional methods. I mean, I'm not ashamed to admit I advertise on Instagram. I have a
mm,
budget that I set out every month, and I advertise on Instagram to increase my impressions and boost my personal brand. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I'd rather
yeah.
do that than buy followers.
It's a yeah. It'll be much more organic to advertise and get the people
Yeah.
that will actually interact with your content, right?
Yeah.
Versus just buying like 20,000 followers and
Yeah.
also risking your account, because I hear Facebook and Instagram, they ban those types of accounts once they find out.
Yeah,
That,
yeah. They do delete your followers or whatever, but yeah, just be authentic to yourself. I think all of us have a talent that's unique, or a certain set of talents that are unique.
right.
Use your social media to project that. Put it out to the world.
Yeah. So I guess managing your schedule, we want to get a better
Yeah.
sense of what your daily schedule is like, how you wake up, I guess, and what do you do. And you're a multitasker for sure. You have to get a lot done
Yeah.
in a week, in a month. So how do you manage your schedule?
I wake up. I'm at work usually from like 9:30 to 7 or 8. I try to allocate my time to different tasks. So like, let's say when I'm at work, I don't do anything related to my blog at all. I'm 100% focused in the work. Or when I get home, I just focus on my blog. There are times of the day, like 8 to 9 p.m. is usually when I would post something, I would write my content, I would write my poetry, or I'd edit my photos. Even in terms of like, campaigns and shoots, let's say I'm out for a review, I use my reviews as an opportunity to meet. I manage my time in certain ways where, if there's an event, I take a friend along. Or if
Mhm.
there's a review, I take a friend along. I do my shoots on weekends. Like, today was a Saturday. So I do my shoots on Saturdays. So it's just about kind of
Mhm.
having your blinders on and
Yeah.
focusing on one thing at a time. Certain things I do to manage I really believe in meditation. I try to
Mm.
meditate like
Okay.
5 to 10 minutes a day.
That's
So
great.
yeah,
Do you meditate in the morning?
I try to meditate in the morning. Yeah, first thing I wake up, and then a little while after that, I try to like just
Yeah.
zone out and meditate. Yeah,
Right.
but
Makes
yeah, it's
sense.
just I just try to keep focused on one thing at a time. I try to take things one thing at a time, and I try not to.
Not overwhelm yourself, right,
Yeah,
with what I
or
have
let
to do
one
next.
thing
Yeah.
spill into another. Yeah, let one
Yeah.
thing spill to another. But sometimes I do feel like I'm just getting through the day. I sometimes even I have no idea what I'm doing, but yeah, I just try to wing it and do
Mhm.
my best.
Yeah. And here's the question I had, Harun. I just remembered
Tell me.
since you mentioned your blog, and it has to do with this as well. So your blog,
Yeah,
you mentioned earlier that you recommend post every day, right? Come up with content
yeah,
every day.
yeah. When you're starting off, yeah.
Yeah, especially when you're starting off. Yeah. Now,
Hmm.
when you were doing this, did you ever struggle to find content? Oh man, what am I going to post about today? What type of content? Like, how did you kind of, I guess, get those creative juices flowing every day to post something?
Definitely. I mean, I have a post right now that I'm supposed to post, and I have no idea what to say right for the caption.
Mm.
So I face it every day. I think just having a theme and sticking to it um, helps a lot. Like my process has been a bit of trial and error, to be honest. So when I was starting off, I used to write, funny captions,
Yeah.
so just trying to, think of something humorous. That's how I would go about it. Or now it's more like, long captions. It's more about my perspective on life, on things, on what I've been through. So, I just write, just put pen to paper, or just start typing on your phone. Even if it doesn't make any sense, just keep at it and keep on going is what
Yeah.
I would say. That's
Makes sense.
the best way. Or grab a cup
Yeah.
of coffee, sit down and, just go for it.
Right.
Just take the plunge. That's what I believe in. And that's how I
Yeah.
got started. I had no idea a lot of times, and still sometimes I have no idea what I'm doing, but
Mm.
I just do it. I take the plunge anyway.
Yeah. Now, like when a lot of people post content, I mean, and
Hmm.
initially it's so hard when you post content, you get like 2 likes on it.
Yeah,
And did you deal with that in the beginning as well?
definitely. Yeah. And I think, again, I got a sense of FOMO because I used to look at, a lot of other guys, who were doing this for,
Right.
years, and, they had hundreds of thousands of likes, and I would get like a few likes.
Right.
It was a struggle, but you just have to take the plunge. You have to keep on going.
Mhm.
I think, having worked again with a lot of these influencers, I think self motivation is key. One quality that I see in all of these bloggers and vloggers is they're very self motivated. The most successful ones, they weren't like running after money. They weren't running after, being famous or being liked. They just loved what they did, and they just had a story to tell, and they did it. So I think, yeah, it's just important to keep on going and not giving up.
That's
Yeah.
good. So back to multitasking.
Yeah.
You mentioned obviously you focus on one thing at a time. So you go to work,
Hmm.
you come home, and you focus on your blog. That makes sense. How many? I'm
Sort
just
of.
getting
Try
a
to.
now. As a guy who does something very similar, my schedule is very
Yeah.
similar. I go to work.
Yeah.
My hours are like 9 to 6 or 8 to 5,
Yeah.
or the standard
Yeah.
8 hours a day. I come home and then I spend time with family.
Hmm.
Then I allocate a couple hours to something creative.
Hmm.
Now, how many hours do you end up working in those typical days where you have to go to work and also do something for yourself on the side?
It can get pretty crazy because the industry. I mean, agency life. I think anywhere in the world. I don't know where do you work, by the
Yeah,
way?
data guy. I work a lot with data programming, data analytics, and whatnot. It's really fun.
Interesting. Yeah. I've.
But Harun,
Hmm.
while I love my job and what I
Hmm.
do, At the same
Mm.
time, I've noticed I count my hours when I go to work, but I don't count my hours when I'm
Don't we
doing
all?
something for myself,
Yeah,
you know? Like when I come home and I
yeah.
start working on my own stuff, I don't really count the hours. But
Mm.
when I'm at work, I will check the clock. So I've
Yeah,
noticed that for sure. When you're in a field that requires basically having a set amount of time that you
yeah,
contribute to the company, and you're on a payroll, that often ends
yeah,
up happening. I think a lot of people can relate to that.
yeah,
So
yeah. You start counting the hours. Yeah. I
mm,
think I can imagine data analysis. I mean, my first job was in market research. So I can imagine it's a lot of work and it's very draining, right? Like you feel very
yeah,
drained when you come back home at the end of the day and you have no mental energy to do
your
anything.
mind can be really tired because you're running math
Yeah.
all day.
Yeah.
Numbers through your head. So yeah,
Yeah.
you have to
Yeah.
recover a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
But what I find is actually I use my mind in completely different ways when I come home, right? When I come
Hmm.
home, I'm thinking more creatively in a sense that
Hmm.
I'm not crunching as much math as I am thinking of like,
Numbers.
yeah, I'm not thinking of numbers as much
Mm.
as I'm thinking of like just content
How
and,
to tell a story. Yeah. That's very interesting that there's a dichotomy in what you do
yeah,
at work and what you do for your passion. It's completely different. That's really, really interesting. I
yeah,
gotta
yeah.
say. Yeah.
Now, in between that, I noticed, I personally use my mind too much, right? I'm
Mm.
using my eyes too much. I'm looking at the computer screen too much. So I
Yeah.
always try to make sure that I work out as well or just go for walks because if I don't, I neglect myself, my body as well.
That's so important. Yeah, even me, it's so important for me to try to go to the gym at least 3 times a week, whatever time I get. I mean, the industry I work with and Dubai, I think in general, finding a work-life balance is very difficult. People in my
Right.
industry work 10 and on the agency side, I know people who work 10 to 11 hours a day. So a lot of times it can be like, let's say this week was reporting week for me. So I was working like literally 12 hours a day. I'd come back home at 8 and I'd still have to continue working. So
Oh,
it does get very, very tough. I'm not gonna lie, but I try to just use my weekends to recuperate and make up for things. In terms of my blog or my Instagram page, I always set my content up during the weekend. So
mhm.
usually on Saturdays, I leave Saturdays out to go on shoots, to go out to create my content, and to have everything sorted for the next week. I
Yeah,
think that's
yeah,
the way I try to go about it. Sacrificing my weekends and free time.
right. What do you do in your free time, by the way? Like you mentioned you work over the weekends as well. So do you make enough time for your family and your personal life?
It honestly does. Sometimes it does become a struggle. I do stay with my parents, so it does sometimes become a struggle. And my parents complain, and my friends complain. But I try to bring the two together. So if I have a food review or if I have an event, I always take a friend along. And I
Mm,
use that opportunity to socialize with them. So Friday is the day where I don't do anything I don't do anything blog or work related. I just
yeah,
focus on my family and friends. So
that's
yeah,
great.
it's difficult to find a balance for me a lot of times, but yeah, I do try my best to keep. I know if any of my friends are listening to this, I know they're going to be a lot of my friends complain that, oh, you're never free, you're always busy, this that. But yeah,
Yeah,
it is what it
right.
is.
Yeah, it is, right.
And I don't sit home at all. I mean, it's very difficult for me to, just sit at
Stay
home.
home.
And yeah,
Yeah,
I'm not much of a homebody. And I
okay.
guess that helps for my for what I do in terms of content. I'm always out. I'm
Right.
always looking to create content. I love the outdoors. I mean, right now the weather is really nice in Dubai. So like
Yeah.
from October to March, it's very pleasant. So I love
Mm,
going out camping. I love going out to the outdoors. That's one of the ways I kind of
yeah,
refresh and energize as well.
right,
If I can
right.
say that. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. So even on Fridays, you're doing something recreational for yourself
Yeah.
outside,
Yeah.
not sticking home much. Okay.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
don't remember the last time I just stayed at home. I mean, I always think of canceling my Netflix subscription, but I
Mm.
never get around to it. I'm like, no, maybe next month I'll watch a little bit more, because
Yeah.
whenever I see
I hear
my
you.
friends, everyone's always talking about like Bird Box was taking off or this
Oh yeah.
or you
Right.
and I'm always missing out. I'm always
Mm,
missing out on something or the other, but I'm fine with
right.
that.
Yeah. Well, this is the last question, Harun, that I have written down from the poll that you ran. This one is just, I think you might have already covered it. Where do you think the
Yeah.
world of PR is going? you mentioned it's kind of getting saturated.
Yeah, it
There's
is.
there's first adopters. There's a lot of people who have kind of taken over in certain
Hmm,
categories. I can
hmm,
imagine. So it must be
hmm,
more and more difficult to get in.
hmm.
Um, how do you think this is going to shape up?
I think, people always say digital is the future. I think digital is the now, digital is where it's at.
Mhm.
It's everyone's online, everyone's reading online, everyone's engaging online. And now social media, I think, takes up, I think, at least our generation, most of our time is spent on social media. So
Yeah.
PR is all about social media. And I think that's what's, contributed to the rise of influencers and, influencer culture.
Right.
It is getting saturated, and as you said, every other person you see has thousands and thousands of followers, as you just
Yeah.
said. So
Right.
with every brand wanting to be on there, it is getting more and more challenging for your brand to be seen in an authentic way. But then again, I think there are a lot of influencers or publications that still stand by their ground, that are still producing fantastic content. And I think at the end of the day, people will always appreciate good content. At the end of the day, you can buy hundreds and thousands of followers, but if your content isn't great,
Yeah.
eventually it'll show. Now there's like especially in Dubai, like now you have influencer awards and all things of these sorts where the people winning are might not be the ones with the highest followers, but the ones who are the most authentic or have
Yeah.
the nicest content, the most
Mhm.
engaging content. Yeah, and I think
Right.
that wins at the end of the day.
Yeah. I'm curious. You know how, for example, YouTube celebrities, they're
Hmm.
that's a much more, I think, mature market at this point. It's so
Yeah,
saturated. And I've noticed a lot of the way people actually get more hype is by creating controversy or by kind of like attacking each other,
yeah,
uh, roast videos and whatnot.
yeah,
We see this happening among some Pakistani YouTubers as well.
as well.
Is
Yeah,
is
yeah.
this something that's starting among influencers as well? Is there like influencers versus influencer kind of content going on, or it's a much more mature field?
I only follow people in Dubai, the US, and the UAE, US, and Canada, and a few influencers in the UK. Not really. I haven't really seen any attacks, but yeah, people are more likely to call each other out, and I think because it
Hmm.
just gets attention. The minute you talk something controversial, and I think one thing really dangerous, again, this is the dark side of social media, is the minute you post something controversial, if 20 people reply back to you,
Hmm.
um, you think you've done something good, you know,
Yeah.
and you
Right.
feel gratified. And I think that can be dangerous. But yeah, there are influencers who do call out each other, but most influencers in Dubai, at least, they're very PR friendly. They never want to
Yeah.
say anything negative or they don't want to
Right.
say anything bad.
Yeah.
But there are a few that try to get into trouble. I think one Dubai influencer who I know, shout out to her, she's amazing. She called out a big publication for not inviting her to an event or like mistreating her or like sidelining her, and that
Okay.
went viral and her page blew up. And clearly it worked for her. So I think that is a
Right.
dangerous side of things. But at the end of the day, it's entertainment, right? Like people are
Yeah.
not watching TV anymore. They're going on their Instagram stories or their YouTube to get entertained.
Yeah.
So it is
True.
entertainment as long as I think people's
Mhm.
there is a fine line between, like roasting someone or, out of good fun or attacking someone,
Mhm.
or so I think people just need to, as long as you tread that fine line and you're not
Yeah.
attacking someone, it's fine. I've never done it myself. I have called out like, certain practices or whatever, but I've never like, called any
Attack
one
somebody
specific
personally. Yeah.
personally. Yeah, I'd never do that.
Right.
I hope ऐसी कभी नौबत आए भी ना. It never gets
Yeah.
to that point where I have to do something of that sort. But yeah,
I
to
hope
to
not.
each his own. Whatever helps you, as long as you're not attacking someone, I think
Yeah.
it's
Right. Of course.
fine.
I think so.
Awesome, awesome. Enjoy,
All right.
man. Enjoy your weekend, and
Thank you.
we'll keep in touch.
Sounds Sounds good.